Everybody, I'm Marcus Andrews. I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Pendo, and super excited to talk today about culture and process. I personally am excited for this one because, as in product marketing, I sit with the product team a lot, but I'm a little bit on the outside. And when I look in, I think I see a lot of chaos sometimes and tension, and it's a little it can be kind of crazy, right? So I am excited for this one because I think culture and process are two things that can really help steady a ship. And so it's really exciting for me to learn from our panel today about how they do it and how they think about it. Product teams are extremely cross-functional. You have all these competing asks from different teams, be it leadership or engineering or customers, and you have to influence. You don't necessarily have authority. It's sort of a lot of teams can be chaotic, but it's almost like product teams are built to be chaotic. They're structured, they're designed for this. And it's really interesting, right? Because when you get it right and when that chaos goes well, it can actually be a good thing. It can be a pressure cooker that creates beautiful stuff, and it can also explode. And I've seen both in my time working with product teams. I'm sure our panelists have as well. But I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know how to manage this. This is why I'm the moderator and not on the panel. And we have some really smart folks who are going to help us navigate this, I think, that we can learn from. So we've got a bunch of questions. I think we're going to have time for audience questions too. So if you have things that you hear while we're talking or areas you want to dive deeper into, just save them for the end and we'll get your questions answered. So, okay. So I don't know if everybody's been introduced, but we've got Pamela, Bettina, and Mamuna here. So Pamela, I'm going to start with you. When you think about the environment that product teams are in, kind of what I was talking about, this tension or chaos or conflict that exists, is that an accurate description? Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? What is it what is it about? How do you feel about this? How do you define it, I guess?
So it can be, of course, good and bad. As you describe it, as chaotic quite often. I think when we talked earlier, I was challenging that it's conflict or how to think about conflict. And I'm not a perennially optimistic person, but I do try to figure out how to turn chaos into something productive. And so I think conflict, especially between interdisciplinary teams, to me can be turned into what I call creative tension. Yeah. Because I really, really believe that the most amazing innovative solutions or even the best problem solving happens in some level of constraint. And if the teams trust each other, if they really can figure out how to work together from a product design engineering perspective, then you can really solve problems magically. And the tension can be turned into something super positive. It doesn't mean it's not stressful or that it's exhausting or it can be frustrating, but it doesn't have to be conflict. And I think my common sense when you use the word conflict is always that it has to be some kind of compromise. It's somehow lesser than if you had it just your way. But I think that's unrealistic. I think we have to always solve problems and constraints, and I'm very much a believer in the power of constraints to help us create better solutions. So I try to turn it into something positive, and really, at SumUp in particular, we're focusing on this message of one team and bringing that back, because I think Rory talked about this waterfall version of Agile. I think it's what I've seen most of the time. And so figuring out how we can really work together in something that creates that magic is how I think about it.
Yeah, I think that the cross-functional nature, like Rory too was talking earlier about how teams are becoming more cross-functional, and that's maybe the future, is you've got these roles that have a foot in lots of different disciplines. Product managers is probably the easiest one to see that, because they have to understand design and business and engineering and marketing. And but yeah, there's tension there, right? Because then it's, I think from my perspective, there's always a lot of tension. Well, not always, I actually don't see it too much, but sometimes you can see tension between product managers and product marketers because they're the swim lanes aren't defined or it's gray, but ultimately it's good because and it's good creative tension, I think. Bettina or Mamuna, anything to add there? Anything that you've seen, is in a positive way when this conflict happens or this tension happens in cross-functional teams?
I want to call out the comment about trust, right?
Yeah.
I think that is so important, and it enables that difference between teams that spiral and teams that come together more closely. That's the key. So, great comment.
I second everything. I think that it's interesting because the tension is where the creativity just does come up. And oftentimes what I like to see is when you do have some of those blurred lanes, you have engineers who can act like products, designers that act like products, product that acts like engineers, whatever it may be, but they feel like, I have the impetus to make that change. I see a thing, I'm going to take ownership. So I love to see that in those moments.
Yeah. And if it bubbles up into a bad thing in the team, like what do you do? Or so it's a good thing, right? But sure, there's some tension there. So if it does bubble up into a bad thing, how do you address that as a leader of a product team?
I think it's an honest conversation. I think as a leader, it's important to have trust with your team so that they know that you mean everything in good intention. So it's not that you're calling them out for doing anything wrong, but it may be a boundary or something they need to be more mindful of, and it's just a teachable moment.
Yeah, love that. Cool. All right, so there is a lot of things in the world right now that is making all of this harder too, right? One of them is a big shift to remote, which we've gone sort of back and forth on, but Shopify, totally remote. You guys don't have offices, right? So how do you build culture and help build an environment of trust in cross-functional relationships when you don't have a physical office and you don't have that mingling? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So, in the beginning, at the beginning of COVID, I wasn't at Shopify, I was at Kickstarter, and it was a scramble because everyone was trying to figure out what tools to use, how do you find visibility, how do you build trust, where's communication take place, what's too much, and all those fun things I'm sure that we've all been through the past couple of years. But what I found at Shopify is that sometimes when you kind of let go of trying to control too much, there's a natural pace and cadence that builds upon teams. Of course, you have to help support them, but in a lot of instances, you'll see teams want to build togetherness. So then you start to say, okay, what are some things that we can do to help connect the dots? And a lot of it comes down to, like, foundationally, does a team trust one another? Do they have some cadence of communication? I could, as a leader, say, I want all of my teams to work 9 to 5. But for a global company, that is not logical, right? And so you have to let the teams who have people in EMEA or in Southeast Asia, wherever it may be, understand what works well for them and find their right cadence of work. So a lot of it is trusting your team to trust themselves to make good decisions. And when it starts to veer off the rails, you can start to help them in those instances. But I think once you do start to trust them, you find that you get to see the creativity come up a bit more than you would in other instances.
So that's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because all right, Shopify's a big company, you get a lot of employees, and I think a lot of leaders probably think as the company grows, you sort of need to lock down more, but you're letting go more, you're letting more things happen. Is that accurate? And then how does leadership feel comfortable with that? It's got to be a little scary.
Trust. That is accurate, and honestly, once as a company scales, I don't think it's realistic to try to control everything because you don't know all the edge cases, you don't know different circumstances, but the teams do, and they know what they need. And so a lot of times it's how you're plugged in as a leader to support those teams is the best way. So you're more of a supporting role at times. You can come in with the guidance and you can come in with recommendations, but it's not a highly structured environment that they have to follow.
Yeah. They trust. They know what they need. I think that's a great point. Yes, of course, right? They do know what they need. That makes sense, but it's hard. Anything to add there, Pamela or Bettina, about your own experience in remote or scaling a company? Did you agree with that? Have you had to do that in your own jobs and experience as leaders?
We of course, we're all remote, and we have always had some level of remoteness because we are a global company. Right? And we have quite a few offices, so there's always somebody remote in some way, shape, form, or another. I think we've adapted quite well to the tools, but we hold quite a strong belief in co-location. We have been, our offices have been open for about a year and a half, very informal, and we've been coming and going as people wanted to. For some people, it's essential because they had moved to Berlin and we had been in lockdown and were living in really small apartments and they were really suffering from depression, et cetera. And so having that kind of flexibility has worked really well. But we're also discovering really that there is certainly for myself, and especially I think in the product space, there is a level of just creativity, but also expediency that happens in communication that I have not been able to figure out how to replicate using a Miro board or a Zoom call or yet another Zoom call. So we're going to be encouraging people to come back on at least 3 days a week, just to be able to start to facilitate more of that exchange. And I do believe it works faster and more efficiently in some instances. So I know it's a very conflicting, maybe also not everybody shares that perspective, but certainly for me, it's been, Zoom is soul destroying. And so I mean, it's amazing that it works, and I love having option to work from home on a day that I find. But as my extrovert side really grays from those really informal meetings, and I talk to people in the office that I would never get on a Zoom call or Slack, for. So, and those exchanges are the most valuable ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we can all agree that we're all zoomed out, and it's it is taxing. But also, it's what I hear. I think is flexibility. It is an approach, and doing what's right for you, and trying to. There is no right answer for any of this. So I think understanding it, and then listening to people, doing what's right for your audience. Pamela, let's stay with you. One thing we're starting to talk about a little bit already, and I think one thing in the most innovative environments and product teams, any team, is that people feel safe to fail and try things that don't work or sound dumb, whatever it is. A lot of that is you can't have that unless you have psychological safety, unless people feel real comfortable having the ability to mess up and fail. Culturally, or maybe from a system standpoint, how do you build that? How do you help instill that environment or culture, create that safety?
Yeah, I was prepping a little bit for the questions. I was trying to remember what I used to call this, but I'm not convinced people really want to fail. But I think we're trying to, but I think it is the thing that we talk about it, because you do make either mistakes or you do things that don't work the way you've intended to. We do retrospectives quite regularly, not consistently, but do really try to reflect on what worked and what didn't work and adapt. And I'm a little bit late to retrospectives, but I've really seen some great opportunities and conversations come up with that. And the sum up is very much believes in open feedback and radical candor. We're not very good at practicing it, but as a leader, I think really reinforcing that and listening and understanding and encouraging people maybe to look at it from different perspectives, I think has worked quite well for me in the teams that I've been working with. But I think it's always it's because people actually try something for a particular reason, understanding what they were trying to accomplish sometimes provides an opening to also make suggestions or build on what may have ended up not working in a way that becomes much more constructive.
Yeah, and I think you're talking a little bit about some modeling some behavior too from leadership, which I always think helps a ton, right? When you see your leader show that it's okay for them not to be vulnerable and authentic, right? Or fail. I think that helps people too. Anything to add on to that? Anything that you think helps build that safety and trust?
Yes. I think another way to think about it is to kind of reframe that the option is not to fail or not to fail. It's to fail quickly and in as small a way as you can, or to fail in a big, slow, expensive way, right? So when we think about it as trying to avoid failure or optimize for perfection, we'd make lots of those big, slow, expensive mistakes. And that's what I've been trying to emphasize with my team.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo the modeling. I think that was the big one for me, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when, I personally was moving very quickly trying to fix things for my team and help them get settled. And I just feel like I didn't know what it meant to lead in this remote space and how to support my team like through this transition. And I just started being very open with the team, like, we're all doing this for the first time. I'm going to make mistakes. And I would just openly talk about the mistakes I would make, my thoughts on them, what I learned from them, how I was going to apply those learnings going forward. And people were like, wow, I should do that too. And I think creating that space where people are like, well, if she does it, then maybe I can do it. And then it passes down to the next person. So modeling worked really well for me.
Yes, and I mean, the pandemic helped with that in a way, at least for me too, because I'm on a call with my team and there's, my screaming 1-year-old because something happened, right? And it's just like, hey, this is how it is, it's like, nobody, like, this is real life. And I think pandemic brought some of that brought real life a little bit more into our work world too. All right, so Bettina, I think you're at Peloton, VP of Product at Peloton. You guys have had, it's been a roller coaster year for everybody, but not everybody has had a Sex and the City reboot, like their product featured in a Sex and the City reboot. I don't think so. Probably not too many products. But for a year or a couple of years, I think everyone's had, but in your experience, how does culture help you through that? How does, what works, what doesn't work? How do you keep the team strong and focused and, feeling together with culture as a tool, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. And it's a great question. I'm very much kind of working through this now, so extremely topical. I think the good news at Peloton has been that our culture historically has been pretty strong. A great sense of ownership, focus on the member, collaboration, trust. So we started from a good place. And then you've got all of this external noise, right? Coming from the market, coming from, your friends at a cocktail party, right. Coming from outside of the company and outside of your team. And one of my first approaches as a leader was entirely wrong, which was to say, stop paying attention to that. Yeah. Just focus. And it's sort of like telling someone to calm down. It doesn't actually work. I think that after having realized that this was not a good plan, I kind of brought my team together and we spent some time brainstorming and thinking through this. And where we got to was, how do we create the environment for focus inside of the team and create, the counter to that noise? So that means being much more transparent than we had been in the past and talking a lot about failures, big and small, honestly and openly, making sure that we were talking about not only our strategy, but also our path towards the strategy. So it's not, a big bang of 0 to strategy. Bringing people along the path, I think, helps build trust and help them feel like they are part of it. And then also just really empowering people. When you've got folks who have high ownership, who trust each other, who work really hard, they see a problem, they want to solve it, right? So how can we help them do that and kind of pull apart feelings that you start to get at bigger companies kind of naturally unless you resist them? So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love that. I think, exactly. Like your natural reaction when there's all this noise might be to, we got to try and block it out, right? But I think if you address it, you take the wind out of it, you take the power away from it, right? It's
exactly.
Okay, this is we're going to address it, we're going to talk about it, and it's not, we can talk about it, but we're still going to focus to create this environment for it.
Yes, and we are not our stock price. No one is their stock price.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, regardless of what's going on in the world, that's good advice, right? You have to keep that approach because we're building generational companies, right? It's not like this couple of years doesn't matter in the big picture.
I love that.
Mamouna, all right, so a lot of people are stressed out, people are burnt out, we're juggling kids at home and health. How do you create a culture that supports people on your team, but also is innovative and is meeting their goals and is pushing and is, challenging people? How do you balance those two things? Are they at odds? I don't know. How do you think about that?
Yeah. So when I transitioned out of into Shopify, I was completely burned out. Like, I was done. And so the awareness there for me, like, really hit home during the pandemic, because I was always like, yeah, I can do it. I just kept taking things on. And so now I can, like, see the signs in people. But the biggest thing for me is awareness. And I always tell the team, I'm like, listen, if you're not here, like, it's not, like, it can't get done. So it doesn't matter how hard you push yourself, how hard you push your team. If they're burned out, you're getting nothing out of them. And so it's just consistently telling people that they have to find that balance for themselves. We talk a lot about work-life balance. Balance is different for everyone. A person can sleep 8 hours, a person can sleep 4 hours. They could both feel the same. It just depends on the individual. So it's really about helping your teams take a moment to pause and understand what is the right pace for them. And again, it's the individual teams that are going to understand how they operate and how they work. Sometimes I'll see some of my teams in Eastern staying up late to stay with their APAC team. And I'm like, you're working long hours. Do you really want to do that? But for them, they have a plan in mind. They're going to say, okay, we're going to work late today, but we're not going to work late on another day, or we'll end the day early on another day. So you have to encourage folks to, like, I have some workaholics on my team, and it's just kind of buddying up with them and teaching them to see the signs of burnout, to find those balances. But it's constantly communicating it. It's modeling it. So, I'm juggling being a parent. I'm juggling all of the different things that pop up. It helps people understand that it's okay, and it's okay if you have to take that moment. Something happens, don't freak out. Let's talk about it. I think psychological safety also plays a part in that, because they trust that you trust them to manage their time as adults. So there's like a base foundation of psychological safety, and then you can kind of build on top of that.
Yeah. I think one point you made in there, which is really hard, is that, like, you could see some behavior that is, like, unhealthy. Like, it would be unhealthy for you, right? Like, but you got to take your personal hat off and be like, okay, maybe it's just they are going to work because they have to finish this project. Otherwise, it's going to bug them and bother them and make it worse for them. And like, that's just not how you would approach it. But like what you're talking about, I mean, it's really hard, I think. But that makes a lot of sense to me. Anybody want to build on that? Like, how to manage that? Like, how you view, like, high performing team versus burnout and taking care of themselves. Anything that's worked for you?
I mean, I think we definitely encourage people taking care of themselves. I think I've seen it go a little bit almost, as a leader, I have to be careful to also watch, like, when is it actually being a bit abused? So there's a bit of a fine line between that, which I think just happens even naturally with the blending of, home life with everything else. And for some people I know, I've gone out of my way to really make sure that they can not feel stressed, because, I mean, in Germany, the Kita's closed, and what do you do? Suddenly you have 2 little kids at home. To your point, we can't put more stress on people because they can't do anything, about that kind of situation. So we've been really making sure that teams feel comfortable with that, and I know the high performers will make up for it. I think it's then watching out for who should be a high performer, but seems to be sliding a little bit. And this is where, as leaders, we just have to pay attention to it individually, and just see how we can support them, or what's missing, or are they frustrated, or are they not clear of what's preventing them from being the high performer.
Yeah, I think that it's really important to be able to have that individual conversation with people and say, I saw you in this meeting, you seemed frustrated, is something happening? How can we work through that? Maybe you seem burnt out, or the opposite, right? We're looking for this outcome from you. It seems like we're not getting there. How can we problem solve? And I think that kind of leveraging radical candor, being willing to work with people one-on-one, can really help, at least with your directs. It's hard with the larger team, of course.
Yeah.
That's a great point too, I think. And if someone is, doing their best, they're struggling, or they, need some help, and you as a leader see that and you point it out, I think it is very cool, as an individual, because you really do feel like someone cares about you. Then it's like, oh, I didn't even say anything; they just noticed, and or won't tell me. Okay, so we are just world of uncertainty right now. In general, it's great. It's so much fun. But pandemic, some economic challenges, like whatever, we'll deal with next. What are do you have like rituals or like my example is like I love our Monday morning stand up every week with my team. It's just something that we do. Sometimes there's an agenda, sometimes there's not. It's just this ritual that like feels good and brings us together. Do you have rituals or like systems or processes that you swear by that helps keep you grounded in times of uncertainty, or just in general? We can start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when we had some of the recent reorganizations, one of the things that we realized was that how we modeled as a cross-functional team, kind of product and engineering and design, was affecting how the teams were treating each other, right? And so one of the things that we started doing was just every week, we all spend time together and we hash it out, anything that needs hashing out. And the kind of improvement there has been so marked, because when we talk to kind of individual teams about strategies or where they're going, there's more alignment and more context. And that helps also inspire the folks on the teams to also treat each other with that trust and directness and respect. So.
Yeah. Muna, how about you? Any rituals or processes that you
So I am very sporadic. So,
Non-system.
yes, I think that a lot of times you just kind of go through the week and you see when your team needs a little pick-me-up. And so it's maybe, let's have breakfast together, let's have lunch together, and like getting folks who are available. But because of the time zone differences, it can be hard to do a stand-up at the start of the day because it's at random times. So a lot of times just finding some quick moments to, whoever's available, let's hop in and chat for 15 minutes about nothing or about something. And Shopify also does this concept of bursts where we travel to locations as a small team or as a big team, and we work on things together. And that puts us in a space together where we can kind of have those creative whiteboarding sessions, and we can go off, a couple weeks later and continue to work off of that. But it varies depending on the team.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. The whiteboarding sessions, I'm remote and was hired in my job remote, and there's also a pandemic, right? But like, man, whiteboarding sessions I really miss, and like Miro's cool, but it's just not the same as like you get in a room with the right people and have a good, so that's cool. Pamela, how about you? Any systems or processes you really swear by?
I'm really mixed on regular meetings. So a part of keeping the community together globally has been really to do some regular check-ins, either with my leads, or we have product syncs or brand syncs or research syncs on a regular basis. They seem to go in waves. I know not doing them causes a problem, but doing them is sometimes also really like pulling teeth. And so it's... We're just now going through with a bit of a refresh of what works, what doesn't work, and just finding these moments for people to come together and exchange. We've just recently shortened the time for some of these meetings and created a little bit of a tighter sort of one-pager stand-up format almost, and that seems to work really well, and that people really engage and spend the time, and it's just enough of that sharing that is happening. But I think for me, it's always like having to invent something new in order to keep it fresh.
Yeah. I mean, refreshing it, sort of spring cleaning, if you will, of those systems and like that's really important, right? Because you can get in the rhythm of doing something, and then it just becomes a thing that no one actually likes this meeting, and it's just time on the calendar that we don't like. So it's good to check in with the team on that, obviously. Right? So okay, that's all my questions. I think does anybody have? I don't know exactly how we do this, but I believe there's a mic that will move around. There it is. Cool. Does anybody have any questions for the panel? Anything they heard that they want to dig into a little bit? Can't really see, but if you have one, raise your hand and we'll get you the mic.
Might be worth turning. Can we turn the lights up maybe a little bit?
So cool to see all of you. This is amazing. I haven't done a talk in person in so long. Sorry to just say that, but I was talking to Mona a little bit about that. It's great, isn't it?
It is.
And we all got masks on still, but boy, it's fun.
So I thank you so much for this panel. I really enjoyed it. One question, even though we're all excited to get back into person and, collaborate together, is there any process or any sort of positive tension or detension that this whole pandemic has taught you that you want to carry over into an in-person role that you don't want to lose? If so, what are those things that you've learned that are new for your team?
Wow, I have very strong feelings about this as an introvert who manages mostly extroverts. So I would say there's documentation, right, that kind of open floor plans with a ton of people in them are really overwhelming for a lot of us. And so one of the things that was kind of a good result of everyone having to work from home was that folks who needed to do heads down work and worked best that way found that they had the time and the space and the quiet in some scenarios. I know this is a mixed experience for everybody. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot as a manager of some folks who work really closely with hardware and need to touch it and watch people exercise, and folks who work with software where there's this move towards remote, is to think about how to help people frame that up for themselves. It is, again, one of these trust exercises. I want folks who have really high ownership to know how they work best and then go do that, right? And so we've been thinking about how do we frame it in terms of guidelines or principles rather than kind of you have to be in a certain number of days or something like that in our case.
I would agree with that. Certainly the flexibility feels really different. I mean, I've always worked in companies where there's never a hard rule that you couldn't work from home when needed to. But I think now there's a lot more understanding of what is it that you need to do, and then it doesn't really change the perception of efficiency and or impact. So I think getting that balance right between making sure that there's enough of us in the office at the same time to benefit from being in the office, versus having that flexibility to adapt to the moment in time or to what you need to be doing. I think that to me is a pretty significant shift that I think we'll preserve as we go forward.
I guess the thing I'd add is communication, and how you scale communication. Pre-pandemic, we were always in an office, or we were in offices, and you could have a quick meeting, you could walk by a desk. And my thought now is that even for folks who are going back in the office, you probably won't all be in the office at the same time regularly. So you're going to have to think about how you have some people in meeting rooms, and then some Zoom or some other space. And now that we understand what that feels like, if you're in a room and then maybe you're on the Zoom, and how uncomfortable or how challenging it is to hear a person across the room or whatever it may be, I think we're going to be more empathetic to that experience and how we scale our communications across teams.
That was mine too. And you took the words out of my mouth. That was like, as someone who's hired remote and wants to work remote at a company that there's an office, there's not always empathy for the remote person on Zoom who can't hear what's going on in the meeting, right? But now there is, because we've all had to do it. So it's a great one. We've probably got time for one more question. Anybody out there have another one for the panel? Be brave. Here we are. Yeah, do you want to wait for the mic so we can all hear it? Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for all the great conversation and panel sessions. I have a question about the one-on-ones in the remote situation. How do you communicate with your direct report or team and the one-on-one in the remote?
Can you say the last part again? I don't know.
How do you communicate with the teams in a one-on-one setting, in a remote
in the remote setting?
Yeah.
Do you have any tips?
So, for me, it again comes down to that psychological safety and trust. And so, being remote, you don't see them. You can't see how their hands are maybe sitting or what's going on around them. And so, the first thing I always do is check in with folks to see what's going on around them, what's going on in their teams, what's top of mind for them. And sometimes it has nothing to do with work. sometimes it's something personal, and making space for them to share openly, because the more they trust you, the more, like, I think the harder a person works if they trust the person that they're working for believes and wants to see them supported. And so it's taking the time to address those things first, and then it's diving into the normals. And at the end, for me, it's always saving time to check back into their goals. So how are we tracking against any of the goals that we've set forward? How are they feeling about it? What are they excited in, and how can I support them as their manager or leader?
Yeah, I think that's a great point around, like, it might not always be related to work, right? Like, I mean, oftentimes it isn't. And like, I think especially like, younger millennials or like Gen Z, to come back to that earlier conversation, they really want to bring their whole self to work, and like that, and that's a good thing if they want to bring their whole self to work. So, embracing that and figuring out how to have those conversations, right, in a positive way or whatever, I think is important. But
I used to dislike chit chat in the office setting, but it is so important to have kind of room for not even really small talk, just talk that isn't work centric in a remote environment. So agreed, 100%.
Absolutely. We may have time for one more before we get the hook. Anybody else? All right, over here.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. You guys were talking about the kind of importance of kind of sensing when something's off with your kind of direct reports, and I think that's really powerful, of showing that you have that kind of I guess emotional intelligence, or that that observation to know them enough. I guess my question is, what strategies do you use to allow people to open up and show you kind of when something's off? I mean, obviously you can kind of tell if someone's maybe frustrated or something, but do you have any stories on how you've been able to kind of use that as a tool to get people to be vulnerable to you if they haven't yet before?
Yeah, I use the one-on-ones as my baseline. So I get a sense of where they are, how they react to things. Like, you could tell what it irritates a person or what frustrates a person if they're constantly blocked on a certain thing, and you can kind of coach them through. Or if it's a personal thing, maybe they have something going on at home. Like, I had an individual who had a sick spouse, and they didn't want to say it. They just wanted to kind of work through it. And then in our one-on-one, randomly, I asked, what they had planned for the weekend. And it slipped out that they were going to the hospital with their spouse. And I was like, oh, let's talk about that if you're comfortable. And they just let it all out, and from there it was, like small messages like, hey, I need 10 minutes to go do this thing, or I'm going to make it up at this time. And for them, like, they worked harder in the time that they were present, because they knew that, I knew what was going on. They didn't have to hide it, but they felt supported through the process, which made it easier for them.
Yeah. And it does really, it depends on the person and kind of where they are, right? It sounds like that person, maybe it took them a minute to be ready to talk about it at work. So I think that the kind of simpler tool that I use is just, asking a question and waiting. Mm-hmm. And if you count in your head, if they don't come out with it, you can wait. Just patience, being sensitive to what people need at the moment is really important.
What I try to do, and so I will talk about this tomorrow a little bit, but we're very distributed. When in these meetings, we're just talking about where once a month we bring all the design community together. I try to reinforce that anybody can meet with me anytime, and people believe that, because I don't interview most of the designers anymore. I make a point of meeting every designer who joins the company at least at one point for 30 minutes, so I can get to know them a little bit. And so they believe me when I tell them, if you need to talk to me and you look at my schedule and you want to cry, send me a Slack message, and I'll always make time, and I always will make time if I can figure that out. And I think that's the way in which, because I can't see everything. We are too distributed. We are too big as an organization. That I can invite them in to come talk to me, and people do trust that they can and find it valuable. So it's reinforcing the messages and creating an easy space for them to come and talk to me about anything. Yeah,
I would say to build on all of that, like I had a manager who was very cool and collected and would never get frustrated. Even when things were extremely frustrating. And it made me feel like then I did not have, I couldn't do that too, right? So like now my manager, he gets frustrated when things are frustrating and he keeps it real and he's like, this is, and he will show that emotion, I think, and then that gives me the permission to do it too, So I think it's modeling and like knowing that you have the permission to be real and talk about things, I think helps too. So, all right, we are out of time. Let's hear it for the panel. This was really good, you guys. Thank you so much. And okay.